Hello, good morning. You're watching the News Hour. It's just gone 6 o'clock. Also this morning is America reliving the Cold War after Russian bombers built an aircraft carrier and a number of arrests over Chinese spying. We'll have more in a few minutes' time.
Yep, and we meet the mother who forced her 8-year-old son to hold up this sign after he misbehaved at school. What do you make of that?
Punishment fitting the crime. Let us know what you think. Text as usual, place 67890. Text cost 25p plus your standard network charge. Terms and conditions can be found at www.gm.tv/terms, and text may also appear on our website.
Before all that, though, time for the weather from Claire in the Cotswolds this morning. Morning, Claire.
Good morning, Pris. Absolutely stunning morning here. Starry skies above me, and take a look at this, a sea of snowdrops. They're out early this year, but certainly we're getting some more cold weather, so it should sustain the life of these snowdrops at least for another few weeks. It's a beautiful morning here. Elsewhere, we are seeing some dense fog patches, though, particularly across the central belt of Scotland, down towards northeast England as well as the East Midlands. But it should burn off through the morning. Elsewhere, like yesterday, it's going to be a stunning day with a blue sky and sunshine away from the Shetland Isles, where we are likely to see more in the way of clouds, spits and spots of rain. Temperatures today could reach into double figures again, and I think places such as Painswick here in Gloucestershire could reach 14 degrees Celsius, so another mild day. I'll give you more details in around 25 minutes. Back to the studio.
Claire, thank you very much indeed. Our top story this morning, the widow of Gary Newlove, who was murdered by a gang of youths outside his home, has called for the death penalty to be brought back. Helen Newlove spoke after 3 teenagers were given life sentences for the murder of her husband. Kate Evans reports.
These 3 teenagers have been sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Gary Newlove. In this case, life means between 12 and 17 years. But Helen, his widow, says that's not enough. The penalty should be death.
If I saw them now, I'd quite easily kill them myself. I'd quite easily, if it's a lethal injection, put the lethal injection. I've got no time for them. I hate them. What they did to my husband and what they've done to my family. You wouldn't treat animals the way they treated my husband on the floor.
47-year-old Mr. Newlove was kicked to death by the gang during what the sentencing judge described as a night of drunken aggression. Now there are calls for better enforcement of laws against underage drinking from Shadow Home Secretary David Davis.
And we'll be talking to Helen Newlove in her first live interview on the programme tomorrow.
Yeah, now let's get this morning's other news stories from Marcella.
Thanks, Priya. Good morning. Amy Winehouse has finally put her drug problems behind her, according to her mother. As the singer went back into rehab after her triumph at the Grammy Music Awards, her mum, Janice, gave Carla Eberhardt an exclusive interview.
She's on the road, and that's what it's about. She's on the road to recovery.
That from the woman who knows Amy Winehouse best, her mum. She was talking for the first time about her daughter's stint in rehab.
I was helpless. There was nothing I could do because Amy had to do it for Amy. I know about addiction. Addiction is something that once it's got hold of the person, it's very hard to get them off.
Amy Winehouse!
Her rare interview came just hours after Amy's Grammy triumph, where she scooped 5 awards, more than any other artist.
To my mum and dad.
She wasn't able to make the awards in person because she didn't get a visa in time, but Mum thinks that may have been for the best.
I think it would have been too much for her. Seeing what the Grammys was like, she'd be lost in it. She'd be a little girl lost in it.
After months of headlines about her drug and alcohol treatment, it's finally Amy's music that's put her back on the front pages.
Amy's coming back. She's definitely on the road back.
And you can hear more of our exclusive interview with Janice Winehouse in just over half an hour. The alleged mastermind of the September the 11th attacks on New York and Washington has been charged by authorities in America. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 5 other Guantanamo Bay prisoners will be tried by a military tribunal. Prosecutors say they will seek the death penalty. Police are questioning a 17-year-old boy arrested in connection with a gang attack that left a man critically ill in hospital. The 26-year-old victim, named locally as David Burns, was attacked as he walked home from a pub in Droylsden in Greater Manchester. Miranda Shunker is there. Good morning, Miranda.
Good morning, Marcella. Yes, more evidence of street violence, I'm afraid to say, this time involving a 26-year-old victim. He now remains in hospital in a serious condition with head injuries. A very worrying time for his family, of course. But it all happened on Sunday evening. About 200 yards away from here is the man's local pub. He was named locally as David Burns. He'd been watching the Manchester derby and he was heading home with a couple of friends when he was confronted by a gang of about 8 youths. They began with name calling, and at some point he ended up being surrounded by these youths, and one of them at some point punched him and he fell to the floor where he hit his head and he was left unconscious. Now, we understand that possibly some of the gang tried to help him, but he remains in hospital at this point. Police have appealed for more people to come forward, but as we know, a 17-year-old has handed himself in and is being questioned on suspicion of violent disorder.
Thanks, Miranda. Parents and teachers are being accused of exploiting exam rules to gain an advantage for pupils in their GCSEs and A-levels. New figures from the government's exam watchdog show a sharp rise in the number of students given extra time or additional help for learning disabilities such as dyslexia. The number of extra marks awarded for being ill on the day of the exam also went up. A public inquiry into an E. coli outbreak in South Wales that left a 5-year-old boy dead begins today. More than 150 people, most of them school children, became ill during the outbreak in Bargoed in 2005. A butcher who supplied contaminated meat was jailed last year. The divorce battle between Sir Paul McCartney and Heather Mills is set to continue today. There was no sign of any settlement after the first day of proceedings at the High Court. The hearing is being held in private and is expected to last until Friday. On our website this morning, find out why many teenagers feel victimised by the government, why more Brits are coming under increased financial pressure, and as a new survey says job seekers aren't selling themselves well enough, we've got essential career advice. All that and more on GM.TV. It's 6:07, back to Priya and John.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's take a look at the morning papers. Financial Times has good news and bad news. The good news is that sales are increasing on the high street. That's good news for the retailers, of course. Not so good news if you're expecting further cuts in the interest rate, according to the FT, because that might stop them happening. Daily Telegraph says that we're all spending £1,300 a year more on food and fuel bills. We'll be discussing all of this with Justin Urquhart-Stewart in just a tick. The Times says users face net ban in crackdown on pirates. That's a self-explanatory headline, and there are rather grim-faced Paul McCartney after the first day of that hearing yesterday. Yesterday is a headline over there. The headline writers using just about every song McCartney's ever written in various guises. This morning's headlines, you'll see some more of them in a tick. And Miliband, the UK has moral duty to intervene. That's David Miliband, Foreign Secretary, saying that despite the upsets in Iraq and Afghanistan, we should still intervene militarily if we think it's justified.
Quick look at the tabloids as well. Shock rise in house prices. Average home is up by £1,000 as the market rallies. Apparently they went up by £1,000 in December. We'll be talking to Justin in a moment about that. Police your own streets, according to the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail. Teams of Neighbourhood Watch are to be asked to do the jobs that the police have previously done.
McCartney song coming up.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to sing it?
Yes. No,
yeah, go on, give us a line. A hard day's fight, says The Sun. Of course, all about the McCartney-Mills divorce. And get back on the Daily Mirror, Macca's no concessions as divorce fight begins. He's apparently insisting he won't cave in to her cash demands.
Meanwhile, it's emerged that American fighter jets had to be scrambled after 2 Russian bombers flew over an aircraft carrier in the Western Pacific. The bombers left Russia flying over Japan. One jet flew over the US Nimitz, whilst the other circled 58 miles out. 4 American jets were scrambled. The Russians had flown at an altitude of just 2,000 feet, approximately twice the height of the Eiffel Tower, not very far up at all. So is America heading back towards a Cold War? Joining me now from our Los Angeles studio is Professor Edwin M. Smith, who's an expert in international law. Thanks very much indeed for staying up to talk to us. Let's talk about this incident involving the American aircraft carrier. How serious do you think this is?
I really am not concerned about it at all. I think this is a practice on the high seas that can happen on occasion. If the aircraft carrier was in flight operations, perhaps it made the operations officers a little nervous, but for one Bear bomber, a turboprop aircraft, not a jet aircraft, but a turboprop, a propeller plane, a slow propeller plane, to fly over an aircraft carrier is not terribly threatening, so that I'm sure that the carrier would have been concerned if it had been operating at some distance where it could fire anti-ship missiles. But once it came close, it was much less dangerous.
I'm nevertheless left wondering why the Russians would do this. I mean, if they want to take photographs of an aircraft carrier, they can do it from 30,000 feet. They can do it in a whole variety of ways. Why do this? Are they just flexing their muscles?
They're testing their capabilities. They're trying to show that they can project some power, project a few airplanes, some distance from the Soviet Union. But there are only about 50 of those Bear bombers in all of the Soviet Union that can do that, and they're very slow planes. They can fly about a third as fast as the fighters that caught up with them. And they are very large, could easily shot down if necessary to shoot them down. So they're not dangerous at all. It is flying the flag, but it's a fairly non-threatening flag.
It comes nevertheless at a time when, generally speaking, Russia is seen to be flexing its muscles tooling up in certain directions. Should people in the West be concerned?
I think that we should be conscious of what they're doing, but not necessarily concerned. They've let their military capability go completely to shambles for the last few years. So they're now building up close to, actually not close to where they were, but they're showing that they have some capability, that it's not all completely gone. When you have a power like the Soviet Union, you would expect them to do some activity of some sort, and I think they're beginning to show that they can fly their flag if they need to.
Professor Edwin M. Smith in Los Angeles, thank you very much indeed for staying up to talk to us.
My pleasure.
Oh, where are you? There you are. Now then, thousands of teenagers are being punished for cheating in last year's GCSE and A-level exams. Figures published today by the exams watchdog say that over 4,000 candidates were caught breaking the rules. There's also a rapid increase in the number of pupils being given extra time to sit their exams due to illness, as Michelle Morrison reports.
Studying plus exams equals results. An easy enough equation to get right, but what happens when pupils get it wrong and cheat instead? Well, they get punished for it. 4,200 candidates were penalised for either cheating or breaking the rules during exams last year. The highest proportion, 1,600, were caught trying to sneak in with mobile phones or other banned equipment like calculators. 1,300 were found to be copying others or plagiarising, and others broke the strict rules by shouting or being generally disruptive. The number of teenagers given extra marks for being ill on the day of their exams rose sharply. Exam boards say they'll monitor that system closely to make sure it stays fair. But those caught bending or breaking any rules could lose marks or be disqualified, proving that cheating will never help you make the grade.
Well, joining me now in the studio is Isabel Nesbitt from the QCA, the watchdog body for exams. Now, Isabel, we're seeing a slight drop in the actual number of cheats, but it's the change in the type of cheating, isn't it, that we're seeing? So gone are the days when people would write the answers on their arm or, you know, hide them under their sleeve. We're seeing,
yes,
not that I did that, of course,
no.
But we're seeing, giving my secrets away, but we're seeing kids taking in mobile phones and gadgets and gizmos that might help them with exams, aren't we? How can we stop that?
Well, it's not changing, it's very stable at the moment. The figures are the same as last year, and the big picture is that almost all the students don't cheat and get the grades they deserve. We're talking about 0.06%. That's a tiny, tiny proportion. And it's about the same number as last year, of which about 2/5 are about taking things into exam rooms. In fact, that number has reduced from last year, and we've done a big campaign to make kids aware that even though they take their mobile to the bath, they don't take it into the exam room. There's big notices up the teachers.
I don't understand, because when I did exams, we had to take our kit in a plastic bag and actually show it to the teacher. How do they get away with taking a phone in?
Well, several of them have several phones. This is tiny numbers again. There's big notices up. They're asked at the door to give them in. They're asked again, and a tiny number forget that they have phone number 3 in the pocket or whatever. Most of those are people who inadvertently brought them in. The number of those who maliciously brought them is a tiny proportion of a tiny proportion. So we do need to see this in perspective.
And what about this extra time and extra marks? 20% increase in kids getting extra time for exams because they say they might be ill or they might be dyslexic. Why are we seeing a rise in that? Is that just
not just if
people
they
playing
say
the system?
It's not just if they say, it's if there's evidence that they are. What we're trying to do is fair to everybody, for those who are ill and those who aren't ill. There's a tiny proportion again who have problems on the day of the exam or have an illness. And the idea is that the way that they're examined should be the same way as the way that they learn, because that's how you do a valid exam that's fair to everybody. Now, those figures have increased, and we are looking with the disability associations and with parents and with teachers. But one thing we have done is made sure that all the schools, not just the affluent schools, know exactly what the system is and how, if students have genuine needs, they can meet them.
And do you think that this is all a problem of pushy parents? Parents saying, we want you to achieve, you've got to get an A, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And so children kind of feel really pressurised to achieve, and so they cheat.
I'm not throwing stones at anybody. Most children don't cheat. The vast, vast majority, and they're the ones who are the strongest, wanting the tiny number that do cheat to be found out. This figure that's the same as last year is one of a tiny lot who have cheated or misbehaved, and they've been punished and caught. And that's what happens if people cheat. In terms of people getting special help, it isn't anything other than they do when they learn, and what we want to do is make sure that those with genuine needs get the help that they need to be fairly assessed compared with everybody else.
OK, Isabel, thank you very much. So let's remember, you don't win if you cheat, do you?
That's right.
Thank you.
Time 16 minutes past 6. Very good morning to you if you're just joining us. You're watching the News Hour, of course, on GMTV. These are the headlines this morning. The widow of Gary Newlove, who was killed by a gang of youths, has called for the death penalty to be brought back.
A public inquiry into an E. coli outbreak in South Wales that left a 5-year-old boy dead begins today.
And Amy Winehouse has finally put her drug problems behind her, according to her mother, who's been talking exclusively to GMTV. Now then, day 2 of McCartney versus Mills, once again making the headlines. This is The Sun this morning, a hard day's fight. The Mirror says, get back on its front page, while inside it quotes a friend of Sir Paul's saying, he's more sorry than angry, but he will not be making any concessions. The Mail, meanwhile, asks who's smiling after day 1 in court, and the answer seems, according to the evidence of those 2 pictures, Heather Mills. But inside, it says she told the court that splitting with Sir Paul had made her a hate figure, meaning she became unemployable and unable to support herself. Well, divorce lawyer Vanessa Lloyd-Platt has been monitoring events for us, as you probably saw yesterday, and will be doing so again today. Good to see you, Vanessa. Obviously, you're not inside the court. It's a private hearing.
It's a private hearing.
But in normal circumstances, in a contest like this, I call it a contest, so I suppose it is really, what's happening after day 1? I suppose it depends whether they're fighting or they're just arguing the toss about money, really.
Well, it does depend which paper you read. According to the Mail, they've nearly reached settlement and they're just thrashing out the terms. And if that is so, the main sticking point will be the confidentiality clause. What will she say, or what will she be able to say in future? If there is a contested hearing, she would have started off the hearing because it's her application before the court for her finances to be dealt with. So she would have opened the case up, and she has with her, and they reported in the papers today, someone called a Mackenzie friend. What is that? It's someone who advises her about what the procedure is going on in the courtroom.
Not a lawyer.
He is a lawyer.
He is a lawyer.
But he won't be advising her how to run the case. He won't be running the case for her, but just what procedure, what she's allowed to do and not to do.
What's admissible and what's not.
But the judge, in any event, will go over that with her. But she would have opened the case, she will be calling evidence, and then she will then be going into the box if it's a contested hearing.
Tell me this, from your experience, judges have an image of perhaps unfairly crusty old men in funny hats and gowns. How do they treat people who conduct their own defence? I mean, are they patient, sympathetic, or do they get a bit grumpy when they realise they don't know what they're doing?
They can get very grumpy if someone's acting impersonate and doesn't abide by the procedures in court. But in this case, let me explain, they don't wear gowns in this kind of hearing, and the judge doesn't get wigged up. So he will be wearing a suit, people will be wearing ordinary wear, so it won't be like a criminal court hearing. So it's quite informal. But the court will allow her to run her own defence or run her own case to a certain degree. But if she starts raising lots of issues about Sir Paul's conduct, then the judge will say, excuse me, no, you can't. It's not relevant. Or, Miss Wills, where do you think this is going? Where are you going with this argument? So the judge, who's very fair, very reasonable, will stop her in her tracks.
We talk only about money. This, well, it's about 2 things. It's about custody of the child, about confidentiality, 3 things, and it's also about money. Wild claims about how much Sir Paul is worth, £800 million, but who knows? Nobody has a clue.
Nobody has a clue.
How forensic is the examination in court of someone's finances? So how realistic a picture emerges?
Well, it has to be a complete picture. What would have happened before the hearing is there would have been disclosure of all the assets on both sides on these very big forms called Form E, and they are really ghastly forms. They go into the absolute minutiae of everything he has, everything she has, and everything he's likely to have in the future. And then the court will look at that. Forensic evidence will be called on both sides, so that forensic accountants will have already been brought in to make reports as to the extent of the pot of assets. And if she thinks that he hasn't disclosed all of his assets, she can call further evidence. He, of course, will be calling his own experts to confirm what he did or didn't make after the marriage. Now, that's the relevant bit. She will argue that she is entitled to a share of the assets acquired after the marriage, because he's going to try and ring-fence the stuff before. He's going to say he didn't make a lot of money after the marriage and she's not entitled.
Fascinating stuff.
Oh,
Vanessa.
it's going to
Amazing.
go on and on and on, this case.
Good to see you. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Now then, still to come, the snowdrops are out for spring, but does that spell mean good weather ahead? We'll be getting the latest from Claire, who's down there among those lovely, lovely flowers, a little bit later on.
And does the punishment fit the crime? The mother who forced her son to hold up this poster after he misbehaved at school. Do keep your emails coming in on that one.
Addiction is something that once it's got hold of the person, it's like, you know, they're very hard to get them off.
Janice Winehouse there, mother of Grammy winner Amy Winehouse. You can see that full and exclusive interview with her on the News Hour in 20 minutes' time.
First, though, hopes that the Bank of England might cut interest rates further may be dashed today by figures which show that sales on the high street were actually better than expected in January. This is a headline in on the front of the FT. Shop sales dash hope for deep rate cuts. Can you see that there? Yeah, that's the front of the FT. But a separate report shows that the cost of living is soaring, mostly down to food and petrol. So what on earth is going on? Well, Justin Urquhart-Stewart is here. So the front of the FT, we've splashed our cash in January. What does that really mean? It's also confusing, isn't it?
A whole series of different things. Basically what's been happening, you're seeing those figures, some deep discounted sales, people did go out and spend. And so that's actually not showing that actually the retail boom has finished. But actually look at underneath it, you'll find an awful lot of margins have been squeezed. So if you look at the bigger picture, retail spending is probably slowing down. This is the January splurge.
But the Financial Times is saying that because we spent loads of money in January, interest rate cuts or further interest rate cut is unlikely.
It puts them in a real dilemma because, remember, the Bank of England has only got one measure, it's interest rates. Sorry, inflation. That inflation's got to be at just on or around 2%, which is roughly where it is now. Now, the figures we're getting out today, and also some more from the Bank of England tomorrow, are going to give us some much clearer idea as to what's going on. Now, particularly with regard to some of the producer inflation, that's to say the factory inflation, those sort of areas. And we had some figures out yesterday which showed they were the highest for 16 years. So inflation's going up. Therefore, the Bank of England's going to say, oh, hold it on interest rates. We're not going to be cutting as much as we were thinking we're going to be doing. But then the politicians, the Treasury, will be saying, Mr. Darling, well, hang on, if the economy is weakening, we want lower interest rates. Now, which one's going to win will be an interesting dilemma.
Well, that's it, because on the front of the Telegraph, that you just mentioned the rise in factory production, £1,300 extra per year we are now spending. So that's an incentive to cut interest rates, surely?
Absolutely. So actually, we've got to make sure they've got to try and control what's going on. To give you an idea, the price of wheat's risen by 37% in a year. Yet probably the price in terms of what we're seeing coming through is going up by about 3%. So there's a lot of inflationary pressure. We've also had figures to show that imports coming in have been rising at a higher level, 5 to 7%. Why is that? Because China, who makes a lot of our goods, used to have no inflation at all. Now it's got inflation of about 7%. And if sterling, our currency, gets weaker against those currencies, then we're importing it.
Okay.
So the cost of living is getting higher. Interest rate cuts will continue, but not as many as before. But the big warning for people is you have to shop around because the cost of money is actually going up.
As always. But let me just ask you finally about this. The average cost of the home is up by £1,000, apparently, according to the Daily Express. We've heard over the past few months that house prices are dropping. So this is a bit of a boost, isn't it, for homeowners?
Be careful, one figure, and be careful because you're talking about the entire country. It's varying. Look upon the nation as a series of little bubbles like a bar of aero. Some have gone a bit bigger than others, others haven't been affected. So central London has certainly risen a huge amount. Other areas where you've seen some buy-to-lets overdeveloped, you've already seen a bubble burst in some key areas. But overall, what you're seeing is a bit of stagnation at the moment in terms of property overall. But now we're coming into the season, spring, when people start wandering around with twigs in their mouths and start making nesting noises. You're going to see a little bit more movement.
So we shouldn't get too carried away by this headline, but it's not as bad as we think. Yeah.
Not as bad.
Justin, thank you.
Speaking of spring, let's find out what's happening weather-wise with Claire. I've got beautiful blossom in my road, snowdrops out all over the country. What's happening, Claire?
Hello, good morning, John. Yes, I'm in Rococo Gardens in Gloucestershire this morning. And the reason why we're here is there's a stunning display of snowdrops in this beautiful 18th century garden. Now, 15 years ago, the snowdrops probably wouldn't have been out in bloom until the beginning of February. But because the seasons are shifting just a little bit, these are now out in bloom. They have been for the last week or so. Now, because the weather's been so mild, they could die off, but we are expecting the weather to turn colder, which is good news. It should sustain the life of the snowdrop at least for another week or so, which is great, isn't it? Should we take a look at the weather?
GMTV weather, sponsored by Nestle whole grain cereals. Helping you get the 3 servings of whole grain you need each day.
Well, certainly over the last few days, the temperatures have been very low during the night time, and by day, it's felt more like April. And suddenly we've seen a range of temperatures ranging from about -3 in Bournemouth to about 14 or 15, a range of 17 degrees. And that's likely to happen again. And certainly it is going to be another cold morning this morning. But it does mean once the sun gets going, it's going to be another beautiful day. So a frost this morning. Watch out for dense fog patches also, particularly anywhere across Lincolnshire, Yorkshire, up towards the central belt of Scotland, down towards the East Midlands. But it should burn off by around lunchtime. That's the densest patches. Elsewhere, like here in Gloucestershire, it's starry skies above me, and that means a clear morning, a beautiful morning, and a lovely afternoon. Temperatures then today probably reaching the dizzy heights of 10 to 12, 14 degrees Celsius. The air's slightly colder over Scotland, so here I think up to perhaps 8 or 9, perhaps even a 10. And we're seeing more in the way of clouds across the Northern Isles, so you should see temperatures slightly depressed there. Elsewhere then, it's going to be a fine and dry end to the day. The highest temperature is likely to be across here in the western side of England, 14 Celsius, 57 Fahrenheit. And then tonight isn't going to be another very chilly night. Temperatures dipping below freezing again. We are expecting dense fog patches again, leading into another beautiful day tomorrow. I'd say away from that east coast of England, where we could see more cloud encroaching, probably in 30 miles inland. So here temperatures slightly more depressed. Elsewhere, temperatures probably only up to around 8 to 10 degrees Celsius. And that really leads into the next few days, where we're seeing a cold drift of air across England and Wales, where we'll always see more in the way of cloud. Very different to today, but for Scotland and Northern Ireland, you should hang on to the brighter weather. Here's your summary. Get a 5-day weather update for your postcode on our website, gm.tv.
Good morning. It's just gone 6:30 on Tuesday, the 12th of February.
Yes, you're watching the news hour on GMTV in the next half hour. Is Hillary Clinton's campaign coming off the rails as the polls show her trailing behind her rival Barack Obama? We talked to her British advisor.
A GMTV exclusive. Amy Winehouse's mum tells us her daughter is back on track.
I was helpless. There was nothing I could do because Amy had to do it for Amy.
And tough love. Would you make your 8-year-old walk the streets with an apology placard if he'd been naughty at school? We meet the mum who did.
But first, though, the widow of a man beaten to death by a gang of teenagers has called for the reintroduction of the death penalty. Gary Newlove was kicked to death outside his own home. Helen Newlove, his wife, spoke after 3 teenagers were given life sentences for his murder. Kate Evans reports.
These 3 teenagers have been sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Gary Newlove. In this case, life means between 12 and 17 years. But Helen, his widow, says that's not enough. The penalty should be death.
If I saw them now, I'd quite easily kill them myself. I'd quite easily, if it's a lethal injection, put the lethal injection. I've got no time for them. I hate them. What they did to my husband and what they've done to my family. You wouldn't treat animals the way they treated my husband on the floor.
47-year-old Mr. Newlove was kicked to death by the gang during what the sentencing judge described as a night of drunken aggression. Now there are calls for better enforcement of laws against underage drinking from Shadow Home Secretary David Davis.
And we'll be talking to Helen Newlove in her first live TV interview on the programme tomorrow.
Let's catch up on the rest of the news. Here's Marcella.
Thanks, John. Good morning. Parents and teachers are being accused of exploiting exam rules to gain an advantage for pupils in their GCSEs and A-levels. New figures from the government's exam watchdog show a sharp rise in the number of students given extra time or additional help for learning disabilities like dyslexia, as Anna Thomas reports.
Last year, 470,000 requests were made to examination boards for special consideration for pupils on the grounds of illness, bereavement and often dyslexia. 150,000 cases were approved. That's a 20% increase on the previous year. According to figures published today by the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority, a record 70,000 GCSE and A-level pupils were awarded extra time or assistance, prompting suggestions that some pupils, parents and even teachers could be playing the system. Thousands of pupils were also punished for cheating. 4,200 were penalised for breaking the rules last year. The highest proportion, 1,600, had tried to sneak in mobile phones and calculators. Examination boards say they'll monitor cheating and the special dispensation system more closely to ensure exam cheats don't make the grade.
A high-pitched device used to disperse teenagers should be banned, according to the Children's Commissioner for England. The gadget, known as the mosquito, emits a very high frequency that only people under 20 can hear. Professor Sir Albert Ainsley-Green says that it infringes the rights of young people. Police are questioning a 17-year-old boy arrested in connection with a gang attack that left a man critically ill in hospital. The 26-year-old victim, named locally as David Burns, was attacked as he walked home from a pub in Droylsden in Greater Manchester. The American military has promised a fair trial to 6 men charged over the September the 11th attacks. The alleged mastermind, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and 5 other Guantanamo Bay prisoners will be tried by a military tribunal. Prosecutors say they will seek the death penalty. The divorce battle between Sir Paul McCartney and Heather Mills is set to continue today. There was no sign of any settlement after the first day of the hearing at the High Court. Cordelia Kretschmar sent this report.
But there's lots of speculation over what happened in Court 34 yesterday. There are reports that Heather's claiming her life was ruined by marriage to Sir Paul McCartney, that now she's so unpopular she can't support herself. And after a projector was taken into the court yesterday, there are reports today that Heather was showing the judge video she'd shot of the paparazzi hounding her in order to prove why she needs a certain level of security. The fact is, though, we just don't know exactly what happened because divorce proceedings always take place in private. There's a big sign on the door saying strictly no admittance. What I can tell you is that they are wrangling over money, the size of Heather's payment, and experts say it could be as much as 60 million. That would be a record. They're wrangling over access to their daughter, and they are also wrangling over Heather's right to tell her story. Sir Paul McCartney understood to be trying to buy her silence. The hearing is due to take place until Friday, and it continues today.
A public inquiry into an E. coli outbreak in South Wales that left a 5-year-old boy dead begins today. More than 150 people, most of them school children, became ill during the outbreak in Bargoed in 2005. A butcher who supplied contaminated meat was jailed last year. American fighter planes intercepted 2 Russian bombers flying close to a US aircraft carrier in the Western Pacific, it's emerged. The incident, which happened at the weekend, comes amid heightened tension over American plans to base a missile defence system in Poland and the Czech Republic. On our website this morning, find out why many teenagers feel victimised by the government, why more Brits are coming under increased financial pressure, and as a new survey says job seekers aren't selling themselves well enough, we've got essential career advice. All that and more on GM.TV. Coming up, we'll talk to the mother who made her 8-year-old stand in the street with a sign saying he'd been naughty. First, here's what's happening where you are.
Thank you. Good morning. The main stories here in the northwest. The widow of a man from Warrington killed by drunken thugs has called for the death penalty to be brought back. Helen Newlove says nothing's being done to stop the growing culture of underage drinking and antisocial behaviour. 19-year-old Adam Swellings, 17-year-old Stephen Sorton and Jordan Cunliffe, who's 16, were found guilty of killing the father of 3 outside his home last summer. They've been jailed for a minimum of between 12 and 17 years.
We have got no deterrence whatsoever, and we turn our tellies on every day, and there's murders every day. And to me, they're just going down. It was just a day out again to them. They showed no remorse, so I just don't feel anything.
And you can see more of that exclusive interview with Helen Newlove on Granada Reports. That's tonight at 6 o'clock. A teenager's been arrested after an assault in Manchester left a 26-year-old man fighting for his life in hospital. David Burns is still in a critical condition after the attack involving 8 youths near Malvern Avenue in Droylsden on Sunday. The 17-year-old handed himself into police. A television reconstruction showing the last known movements of a Cheshire teenager will be filmed today, 4 years after she was found dead. The body of 17-year-old Shafelia Ahmed was discovered near a river in Cumbria in 2004. Police are going to renew their appeal for information on next week's Crime Watch programme with a special reconstruction. It comes after an inquest last month heard she was worried about being forced into an arranged marriage. Football, and in the Premier League last night, Blackburn's trip to the Emirates Stadium ended in disappointment. A fine header from Philippe Senderos put Arsenal in the lead after just 3 minutes. Then Emmanuel Adebayor made it 2-0 just before the final whistle. Now, just a reminder that if you're in Liverpool this lunchtime, you could meet Tony and Lucy. Yesterday, they were out and about in Chester. Today, they're at the Met Quarter between 12 and 1:30. But the Granada Reports Roadshow is there all day, where you can get the chance to have a go at reading the news. And tomorrow, Tony and Lucy are in Manchester at the Trafford Centre. That's it for now. I'm back at 7:05. In a moment, we'll return to Priya and John. But first, a look at the region's weather.
It's harsh out there. Snuggle up with Pantene Pro-V Winter Rescue, sponsors of GMTV Weather.
Any mist or fog will clear quickly this morning, making way for sunshine. It'll stay fine and bright in most places this afternoon. Temperatures today reaching a pleasant 14 Celsius. That's 55 Fahrenheit.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at the morning papers. Good news and bad news from the High Street. The Financial Times saying that sales are up in January. On the other hand, this may mean that the Bank of England is dissuaded from reducing interest rates. Front page of Telegraph, something you all probably know. It's costing us a lot more to live. Food and fuel prices up by an average £1,300 a year. The Times, self-explanatory headline, users face net banning crackdown on pirates, and a rather grim-faced Paul McCartney after the first day of that hearing in London yesterday. And on the front page of The Guardian, David Miliband, Foreign Secretary, saying that we should continue to intervene despite the problems we've had in Afghanistan and Iraq. We should continue to intervene if it is required.
Yeah, and a quick look at the tabloids. Shock rise in house prices. Apparently the average home is up by £1,000, or went up by £1,000 in December. We've just been talking about that with the financial expert. Front of the Daily Mail, look who's smiling after day 1 in court. Apparently Heather Mills, but I don't really think that's much of a smile, to be honest.
No,
it's more of a grimace, isn't it? But Paul McCartney definitely is not smiling. And the rest of the tabloids, to be honest, just full of all the Mills-McCartney divorce, get back, and a hard day's fight. Now then, a GMTV exclusive now. The British toast of the Grammys, Amy Winehouse, is officially back on top form, and that's from her mum. She might be biased, but we don't think so. Amy scooped an amazing 5 music awards on Sunday night, despite a much publicised battle with drink and drugs. Her mum was so happy that she invited us in for a chat.
She's on the road, and that's what it's about. She's on the road to recovery. I think she had her back against the wall situation. That if you don't get cleaned up, A, you can't get the visa, B, you can't tour, you know, everything in place. It's like, you know, wake up, Amy.
And the Grammy goes to Amy Winehouse.
I think it would have been too much for her. Seeing what the Grammys was like, if Amy were there, she'd be lost in it. She'd be a little girl lost in it.
To my mum and dad.
We all felt, the family, well, everyone who saw her said that's the best she's performed. Amy is as she is. There's no sort of double standards. What you see is how she is. She's a very, very genuine and sincere girl. She was always singing at home, always. And we'd have to say, Amy, be quiet. She just did it all the time. The thing about the media is if they can get anything like tacky about a star, they go for it. So it's almost a case of it's watching her in a theatre. She says to me, Mum, just ignore it. Just ignore it. Just carry on. I was helpless. There was nothing I could do because Amy had to do it for Amy. I know about addiction. Addiction is something that once it's got hold of the person, it's like, you know, it's very hard to get them off. She will see a therapist and she will still be getting help because she still wants the help. Well, it's Amy's coming back. She's definitely on the road back.
Let's hope so. That was Janice Winehouse speaking exclusively to GMTV.
Now then, are the wheels coming off the Hillary Clinton bandwagon? Her campaign manager has stepped down and she lost the main caucuses, her 5th weekend defeat at the hands of her Democratic rival Barack Obama. So can she pull it back? Here's Anna Thomas.
Is the Clinton campaign losing its cool after a victorious weekend in which her nemesis Barack Obama took 4 more state primaries? Hillary Clinton is shaking things up. So out goes Patty Solis-Doyle as Chief of Staff, and in comes Maggie Williams, a long-time advisor and friend to the presidential hopeful. Commentators say it's a sign that her team knows they have ground to make up, and fast. Barack Obama is expected to win in Maryland, Virginia and Washington, D.C. today. That would mean 8 in a row since Super Tuesday. Mrs. Clinton is banking all on the big states of Texas and Ohio on the 4th of March. But could it be too late? Besides her organisational problems, Hillary has financial woes too. The Obama camp raised $32 million last month. She raised just $13 million. And US elections don't come cheap. For Hillary Clinton, securing the Democratic nomination was once considered inevitable. It's now looking like a greater battle than the race for the White House.
Well, let's talk now to Steve Morgan, who's a member of Hillary Clinton's campaign team, joins us now from our studio in Bristol. Steve, good to talk to you. On the face of it, things not looking good for Hillary right now.
Morning, John. Well, you know, we've heard this a few times already during this campaign. Senator Clinton's been written off since Iowa, but as the saying goes, she's not dead yet. You know, you need to put these things in perspective. The number of votes that will be cast and delegates won today in the 3 states will just be equivalent to the great state of Texas when that vote's on March the 4th. So, yes, it's true that Senator Obama is winning the smaller states, but Senator Clinton is winning the big ones when the big ones come up, the ones with the most diverse kind of population. So, yeah, she's not dead yet. It's a long way to go. This race is always going to be a marathon, and she's still in there, and she's still the front runner.
But why then sack her campaign manager at this stage?
I don't think she was sacked. I think there was a strategic decision to take the campaign slightly in a different direction. And, you know, these things happen during the course of campaigns. It's very common in American elections when you make adjustments during the course of your strategy.
Yeah, people were also surprised by the news a few days ago that she's had to throw in $5 million of her own because she was apparently running out of money. Barack Obama, on the other hand, is having money thrown at him, and it's all coming from the grassroots. People on the internet chipping in a few dollars here, a few dollars there. It appears, from that point of view anyway, he's ahead of the game.
Well, I mean, it's difficult to take much stock from some of these press reports. The Clintons have never been short of money or found it difficult to raise money. And, you know, she raised an awful lot of money early on in this campaign. That's eased off a bit. I'm pretty sure it'll come back again when she starts to win the big states in early March.
What about John Edwards, of course, another Democrat who withdrew from the race a little while ago? Suggestions now that he may, within the next few hours, maybe next few days, back Barack Obama. If he did that, what effect would that have on the race?
I'm not sure it'll have such a great effect if it's true that he's going to do it. I would be surprised if he did. These things are all about what you can do in terms of negotiating when you get to the convention. the positions that you might want to take once the election's over. So it would not be a particularly wise move on his part to support anybody and lose his negotiating abilities when the convention comes. And this is going to go all the way to the convention. This may end up with the superdelegates deciding who gets the nomination, or alternatively, Florida and Michigan could come into play where, as you know, John, the delegates are currently being disbarred from the convention.
Yes, indeed. That's a whole other ball game to this very, very complex situation. But, Steve, thanks very much. Dee will also explain to you at some stage, I think, what superdelegates are if you don't already know. I may have to go to Denver to do that.
Why not?
Indeed,
Another excuse for a holiday, hey? You're watching the News Hour here on GMTV this morning. The headlines that you're waking up to: the widow of Gary Newlove, who was killed by a gang of youths, has called for the death penalty to be brought back. A high-pitched device known as a mosquito used to disperse teenagers should be banned, according to the Children's Commissioner for England. New figures show a sharp rise in the number of students given extra time and help for learning disabilities in their GCSE and A-level exams.
Now that it's a question many parents ask, how far should you go to discipline your child? One mother, Marcia Harvey from Jacksonville in the United States, was so angry with her son's behaviour at school, she made him take to the streets with a sign saying, "I was rude to my teacher." There you see it. Why? Well, let's cross live now to New York, where she is at the moment, talk to Marcia. Marcia, thanks very much indeed for staying up to talk to us. What had your son done exactly to warrant this punishment of yours?
My son had been recently told by the teacher and the principal that he was mimicking his teacher, being disruptive in the classroom, and it had been previous to that he had did that. And so we thought it would be good for us to come up with another way of disciplining him. We had disciplined him in the past on the same thing, and we was taking another stand.
Right, now you made him stand out there for 3 hours, as I understand it. Pretty humiliating experience for him, and there's one picture of him anyway with a tear in his eye. Do you really think, with the benefit of mature reflection, that the punishment fitted the crime?
Yes, he pretty much came up with the punishment on his own. When we was once at a red light, and he said he would never stand with a sign. So we really wanted to get his attention on that, that he wouldn't do it again, so he would learn how to respect his teachers and others, and that seemed to be most effective way to get his attention, because we know him and he don't like to be embarrassed, and we knew that he can redeem himself in that way.
Did it work? I mean, are there indications that he has learned from the experience?
Yes, there's much indications that he's learned from that experience. He's shown that that he's sorry and he won't do it again. He's learned from that experience, and he's learned what making good choices is all about. And he's said that verbally, and I really think that he really means it.
On the other hand, as I understand it, because of the rather unusual step you took, you've been feted on American television shows coast to coast. He's become a bit of a star. Doesn't that negate any feeling of remorse that he might have about the whole thing?
Well, we thought about being judgmental and disciplining him as to questioning our way of disciplining him, but due to the fact that we let him know that he could redeem himself and that this was part of parenting, and this is just tough love for me as his mother, and no one will ever be able to take that from us as a connection.
OK, Marcia, well, it's very good of you to spare your time to talk to us about it. Thanks very much indeed. You've sparked several comments and reactions from our viewers back here in the UK. Janet in Medway says, for example, "What a brilliant mum. I work in a school and we could do with a busload of mums like this."
Yep, and apparently we've lost the right to discipline kids with a smack or a clump. We have to find other ways, and talking isn't always the answer. Well, you can let us know what you think by texting us on 67890. Text costs 25p plus your standard network charge. And terms Terms and conditions can be found at www.gm.tv/terms, and text may also appear on our website.
Yeah, Fiona and Ben are up next, so they'll be meeting the Scottish chart topper, Amy MacDonald.
Yep, and Martin Lewis is in too with advice on getting back money from those long-forgotten bank accounts. Important at this time of credit crunch, isn't it?
Indeed, and right after the break, of course, we'll have Claire with the weather.
That's it.